Okay, I want to talk just briefly in this video. We were talking about power in the last video and Nietzsche's hermeneutics of suspicion, where he's finding power behind everything in Western culture. He's saying there's something hidden and something malevolent and something even malicious about what appears to be good. Even our morality, our religion, all this stuff that appears to be pretty good, pretty healthy. For example, the ethic of concern for victims, which is the heart of Christian, Judeo-Christian ethics, that we care about the oppressed, the persecuted, the poor, the orphan, the widow, and that God, and there's a heaven and a paradise when you die, and the good will be rewarded. Nietzsche says, let's look a little bit deeper there, behind those ideas, and see if we can find something malevolent and even malicious behind there. And this brings us to Nietzsche's idea of two things, really, actually two ideas: the will to power and the death of God. Perhaps one of Nietzsche's most famous quotes, if not the most famous quote, is "God is dead and we have killed him." God is dead and we have killed him. It's in that passage on the madman in the text. Just as famous, perhaps, as "What does not kill me makes me stronger." And the idea that God is dead for Nietzsche doesn't mean that God once existed and then died. Rather, what Nietzsche is saying is he's giving us a cultural diagnosis that God is no longer credible. That is, the idea of God is no longer believable. Why? Why is the idea of God no longer believable? Because of science and technology, particularly Darwin. Darwin comes on the scene, right? You had Galileo, you had Copernicus, you had the idea that the world revolves around the sun rather than the sun revolve around the world. That shocked people, but not the way Darwin shocked people. When Darwin puts forth that we've evolved by evolution through natural selection, that was a big death blow to the idea of God as a creator. Nietzsche thinks. Okay, so God is dead and we have killed him. The death of God means the cultural diagnosis that science and technology are slowly eclipsing the believability of God. So it's not just that God doesn't exist for Nietzsche, because Nietzsche is an atheist, of course, but he thinks that slowly the culture is starting to realize this. So in other words, it's a name for, God is dead is a name for secularization. And Nietzsche thinks, there's a problem with this, though. God doesn't just die instantly. It's more like in cartoons, if you remember from Looney Tunes, when the character would go over the cliff, but there'd still be smoke, and he didn't fall yet until he looked down. That's where our culture is. That's where Western culture is for Nietzsche. God is dead. The key value, the highest value, has devalued itself. The key value that supported everything else, the grounding value, has come undone, and culture is about to collapse. So Nietzsche's trying to figure this out, and he's trying to figure out what it means and what it reveals that God is dead. Well, Nietzsche thinks what it reveals that God is dead is atheism, obviously, but moral relativism as well as metaphysical relativism, that is, truth and ethics are completely relative. That is, they're completely made up. They're completely subjective, not objective. They're completely a matter of perspective, right? And of course, nihilism, the idea that nothing means anything, right? And the idea that we can't even believe in anything. And sometimes Nietzsche says, he equates God is dead with nihilism. The idea that life isn't even worth living. Nietzsche's against that idea, but he, of course, is a metaphysical nihilist. He thinks that there is no objective meaning to the world. Okay, but really Nietzsche thinks, once you take away God and the intelligible structures and the moral structures of the world, what are you left with? You're left with power, will to power, or will to life. The will to life, or the will to power for Nietzsche, is just the underlying explanation for everything. Nietzsche thinks if you start seeing the world in terms of power, and power moves and power plays, okay, the world will make a lot more sense. And that's what Nietzsche thinks is revealed by the death of God. And he's got a philosophy of simply the will to power. The will to power is the truth behind all culture, behind all morality, reason, religion. Everything is a power move. Everything is about survival. You can think of the will to power as the will to adapt, or the will to survive in the Darwinian sense. It's this force present, or this instinct, this psychological instinct, unconscious psychological instinct. So Nietzsche is a proto-Freudian. Freud was very much influenced by Nietzsche, right? It's this unconscious force or instinct present in all human beings, or rather all living things, really, okay? And what it reveals, Nietzsche thinks, is that if life is simply about power, and all the structures of Western culture are simply about power, then it reveals a kind of radical perspectivism, And we're going to talk about that in the next lecture. But just in general, understand this. Nietzsche's understanding of the death of God, God is dead, his cultural diagnosis of the death of God means science and technology have rendered God, or theology or religion, incredible, and moreover revealed to us that behind everything we think is good and sacred is simply a power move. Okay, we'll get more into that in the next video.